Hey, what's up? I'm Snoot. I'm the community manager for Coffee Stain Studios. The only community manager for I know that, okay, maybe this is a good time to address this. I know that some people might be asking like, didn't you guys hire like a third community manager? Like, where's Elida? What happened to Elida? So Elida moved back to Turkey, and then Jace left. And now it's just me. The only one left. I'm the community manager for Coffee Stain Studios. In today's video, I wanted to give a quick state of dev for Update 8. I also wanted to give a quick PSA if you're playing on experimental on Update 8 and have run into an issue with a cheeky copper node that's producing limestone in the Western Canyons. And I want to talk a little bit about a topic that comes up every now and again regarding the download size for our patches. So lots to talk about. There are timestamps for these topics if you want to skip ahead. So let's get into it. So first and foremost, let's do a real quick recap of what's happened since our last video, and be sure to grab a pen and paper and take notes because this is all going to be in the test, all right? And I'm going to mention a whole bunch of different versions of the game, and it might be confusing, but let's go. All right. So since coming back from vacation, we made a build including a bunch of performance improvements and bug fixes we had been working on for Update 8 and release it on our experimental branch. This was update 0.8.1. Actually, before we progress further with the video, let's just quickly explain the way we version the game because it might make things clearer. So when we post patch notes, you might notice that we post this information along with the update. This is our public version of the game. We also include something called the change list number, which is our internal number to keep track of the build. So this change list is also what you're seeing at the top left corner of the game. This is so that we can see in videos or screenshots what exact build people are playing. The public version follows a somewhat loose version of semantic versioning. You don't really need to know too much about what that is, other than it's a sort of standard for numbering software releases by denoting what type of release each version is. Each number corresponds to a major, minor, and patch changes for the game. And since we're in early access and we needed a bit more granularity, the way we do this is by somewhat following semantic versioning, but shifting everything one step to the right. So when we released the initial version of Update 8, we denote it with version 0.8.0.0, and when we do hotfixes and bug fixes to this version, we increment the patching number of that version to 0.8.0.1, and if we hotfix again, it'll be 0.8.0.2, and so on. And when we make bigger changes to updates or new features, we increment the minor version. So the version we released after vacation, including DLSS and the performance improvements, was 0.8.1.0. And then if we make hotfixes, we again increment that patching number of the version to be 0.8.1.1, and so on and so forth. We're not always like super consistent with the way we do this public version, but this is roughly how we treat it. All right, confusing? Yes, it is. All right, cool. Back to the topic at hand. So since the release of 0.8.1, we've seen significant improvements in performance across the board for people, and we are super stoked about that. So the plan was to release one patch on experimental, that's one patch, just to like include those performance fixes, and then focus on working on 0.8.2, which will include upgrading the engine again to Unreal Engine 5.2, which will resolve a bunch of issues with Update 8. However, with the release of 0.8.1, we ended up needing to do a lot of hotfixing, as initially dedicated servers on Linux wouldn't boot, people were crashing when joining dedicated servers, pipeline flow indicators broke, crab hatchers and creatures spawning broke. There were a few issues, and we had to take care of that shit. So we fixed most of those blockers for now, but there are still like a few problems lingering with the current build. It has to do with science and whatnot. But we really need to focus on stabilizing the 0.8.2 build. So at this point, we won't be able to go back and fix up issues related to 0.8.1 anymore, because it's significantly slowing down progress on the stable release of Update 8 as a whole. So we've made a lot of progress on updating the engine to 5.2, but there's still a couple of problems left. And we sort of need all hands on deck to be able to stabilize 0.8.2 because there's a whole lot of work needed left. So for now, there'll be no more patches on 0.8.1, so we can focus all our efforts on 0.8.2. It'll be a quicker road towards a stable release of Update 8, but quite frustrating though for you folks playing on experimental right now, running into the current issues until we can get around to releasing 0.8.2. I love how I said releasing with a Z there. That's free. It's not an optimal solution, but I hope this explanation sort of makes sense and that you can sort of bear with us just a little bit more. We really need to make sure that the stable release for Update 8 is as good as it can be, and that's just how it is right now. As to when you can expect to see 0.8.2 and the stable release of Update 8, for that matter, it's still hard to say. We don't really have a deadline we're working towards, as we think it's more important that the update gets like the necessary work done, and we don't want to like overextend ourselves, given it's so hard to like kind of estimate this kind of work. So at the moment, we think that we need probably another month before we can release 0.8.2 on experimental, and then we probably need like a little bit more time to fix it up, any lingering issues, but then we should be good to go. Upgrading the engine to Unreal Engine 5 has been such a huge undertaking, and even though we started working on this upgrade since the start of the year, we're still seeing sort of the fallout from it. So it's going to be worth it in the long run, I believe, but geez, we were expecting that it would take longer than we were expecting, but it took even longer than we were expecting that we didn't expect it to take. But you're all playing Starfield and Baldur's Gate 3 and Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Armored Core 6 and Minesweeper and Ring Fit Adventure, so hopefully you won't like miss us for a bit more. Next up, I want to do a little PSA regarding a known issue on the experimental branch regarding one of the copper nodes, the Desert Canyons, that's producing limestone for some reason. Can you believe that? Can you believe the audacity of that node? We don't know exactly what happened, but for some reason that node just started producing limestone. It might be a migration issue, like we don't really know at this time, but also quickly to point out, like another node that's also been affected is a limestone node in the Western Swamp, so there might be some kind of like trickery happening there, I don't know. So if you already had a miner placed on this node in Desert Canyons, it's gonna start producing limestone. That's bad. Our solution to this problem is that we're going to replace these nodes. What's good to know here is if you're playing on experimental and you've got miners acting up because of this issue, you can fix this by just rebuilding the miner on the node it's supposed to be sitting under. Folks that haven't played on experimental won't notice any difference because once the update goes out on stable, it'll all be solved. So like this will only affect people that played Update 8 on experimental and have had miners on those nodes. So that's it. So lastly, I want to talk about the patching system used by Steam and Epic, because often when we release hotfixes and patches to Satisfactory, people tend to comment that like the download sizes are quite large for seemingly small changes. And I don't know if we've ever explained what's going on. So what's important to know is that we don't handle distribution of our game like at all. That's all handled by each respective platform. So that's both in terms of like, you know, sales and that kind of stuff, but also like how the game is downloaded. Steam and Epic uses delta encoding when patching games. This is how they've done it since the dawn of time, essentially. So it's not that they've suddenly changed the system or anything like that. And then it's like, it's not because of that change you're seeing bigger patches. Like it's nothing like that. It's always been like that. It's probably just circumstantial if you notice that the patches are big or anything like that. Anyways, the way delta encoding works is that each platform encodes and manages like how the build is distributed over the internet, and it attempts to look at what version you have installed and what version is to be downloaded, and they only send you the delta, or the difference between your local version and the latest version, and then locally it will sort of recreate the build using the data from the delta. This system isn't always perfect, as it sometimes can mess up when it recreates the build locally. This is why it's so important to verify your game files if you run into any weird issues with the game. So using delta encoding reduces the download bandwidth, but it also means that it might take longer to unpack and recreate the build locally if it's not installed on an SSD, for instance. So we don't manage the patches that you download. It's all handled by the respective platforms. That being said, there are things game developers can do to improve how their games are handled by that patching system to get the most efficient downloading of the initial game install and patching of updates. And we've taken most of the recommended steps, but there are a few things we can do to improve download size. But these systems are kind of like a black box, so it's sort of hard to know for sure. In the future, we have plans for the game to take advantage of a new runtime loader that should optimize how the game is handled when loading resources. And it's possible that we can better adjust how the game is packaged to make the delta encoding handled by each platform to be a bit more efficient. But yeah, it's hard to say like how much better it will actually get at this point. One thing I also want to point out is that it's a bit unfair for folks to make assumptions as to how much the binaries should change just based on what you see in patch notes and in the game. A single line in the patch notes doesn't imply that it's a small fix under the hood, and seemingly small fixes can sometimes boil down to like quite extensive changes. I also often see the argument that we're just changing like a few lines of code and that should just be like a couple of kilobytes of change. And yes, that is true for source code, but source code is then compiled into machine code and then it's cooked and packaged with the rest of the resources the game uses in a quite complex packaging process, so to optimize how the game takes advantage of those resources during a load. So it's not quite that simple. And with that being said, I think that's it. So thanks everyone for watching this video. I'm so glad you took some time off your busy schedule playing Starfield to watch this video. That means a lot to me. That really does. That is, of course, unless you got the standard version. The standard version. Video games, am I right? All right. Anyway, take care everybody. Bye-bye. First, and I did this whole thing a lot in the last video and people were commenting like crazy about that shit. So I'm gonna try not to do that.